Welcome to a new episode of our podcast dedicated to regulatory affairs and life science. In today's episode, we will talk of the proposed review of Regulation EU 2017-745 and its impact on medical device manufacturers. The effective application of Regulation EU 2017-745, the so-called MDR, determined a deep change in the European regulatory framework on medical devices, introducing requirements that are significantly more restrictive on clinical assessments, post-market surveillance, traceability, risk management, and responsibilities of economic operators. However, some years after full application of the regulation, the experience gained by competent authorities, notified bodies, and manufacturers highlighted several operative criticalities, especially regarding the sustainability of the administrative burden and the capacity of the system to ensure prompt access to the market. In this context, the proposal to amend the MDR submitted by the European Commission by proposal COM 2025-1023 is aimed at introducing measures to simplify and rationalize the system without changing any fundamental principle of the regulation. The proposal places itself within a wider European strategy aimed at improving competitiveness in the medical sector, reducing the bureaucratic burden and promoting technological innovation, maintaining safety and performance standards of medical device unvaried. One of the most relevant aspects of the proposal is the reinforcement of the regulatory process digitalization. The Commission has in fact introduced various provisions directed at promoting the use of electronic documentation and digital tools in the sphere of regulatory compliance. This approach seems to be consistent with the progressive evolution of EUDAMED and with the need to make documentation flows between manufacturers, notified bodies, and competent authorities more efficient. For manufacturers, this line could result in a significant reduction of administrative operations related to the management of paper documents, with special reference to EU Declaration of Conformity, electronic instructions for use, and regulatory communications. However, the adoption of digital tools will imply the need to implement information systems that are more structured and integrated with a quality management system, in particular to ensure document control, traceability of the reviews, and post-market data management according to the requirement of the SIO 13485. Moreover, the proposal introduces elements for higher flexibility in the management of the person responsible of regulatory compliance, the PRRC, clarifying the option of hiring third parties by signed agreements. This is an aspect that is particularly relevant for small and medium-sized enterprises that, in recent years, have often found difficult to identify in-house staff with the adequate competence required by Article 15 of the MDR. From the operative point of view, this change might favor a wider spreading of regulatory outsourcing models, allowing manufacturers to access specialized expertise without the costs of hiring dedicated personnel within their organization. However, it is still essential that manufacturers maintain adequate control on delegated activities and clearly defines responsibilities, operative availability, and how the PRRC interacts with the quality management system. A further element of the proposal concerns the reduction of the administrative burden from the MDR application. The Commission acknowledged that the current regulatory framework has generated a significant increase in the cost for compliance, aggravated by notified bodies' limited capacity and by the complexity of the certification activities. The proposed measures are therefore aimed at making regulatory procedures more efficient, favouring a higher harmonisation and a more proportioned management of the compliance. For manufacturers, this could result in shorter certification processes and more predictable regulatory activities. However, it is important to highlight that the proposal does not change the essential obligations on the evidence of safety and performance of devices. In fact, the requirements for clinical assessment, post-market surveillance, post-market clinical follow-up, risk management and compliance with safety and performance general requirements provided for by the Annex 1 of the regulation remain unvaried. In spite of the element of simplification introduced by the proposal, the European regulatory framework will still request a high level of organizational and documental maturity from manufacturers. The Commission proposal does not change the MDR general system, nor does it reduce the level of responsibility attributed to economic operators. Therefore, the robustness of the quality management system, the capacity to provide appropriate clinical evidence, and the efficacy of post-market surveillance activities are still central. Moreover, there are still some structural criticalities that the proposal seems not to solve, including the still limited availability of the notified bodies, the complexity in the interpretation of some MDCG guidelines, and the operative difficulties associated with the EUDAMED full implementation. These aspects will likely continue to be elements to be paid attention to by manufacturers in the new few years as well. In general, the CEOM 2025-1023 proposal seems to be oriented to make the MDR system more sustainable from the operative and administrative point of view, without altering its essential principles on safety and public health protection. For medical device manufacturers, this could result in a progressive evolution to regulatory models that are more digitalized, flexible, and efficient, although keeping unvaried the need to ensure high standards of regulatory conformity and control of the product along the whole device life cycle. The Renzo Regulatory Affairs, with their long experience in regulatory affairs, will keep monitoring the regulations and legislation changes to assist economic operators to entrust us to obtain conformity to the requirements of the MDR regulation. Thank you for listening to today's episode. If you want to listen to other podcasts, sign up for our channel, follow up on the social media and join us for the next episode.